Ian, Alyssa, and Eric were good kids. Ian was nearing his 15th birthday. Alyssa was 11, and little Eric was only 4.5. And with Ian being the oldest, he tended to take the lead when it came to almost anything. Alyssa thought that he could be bossy at times, but Eric looked up to him as a hero. But none of them asked for the tragedy of their parents' divorce. The day that they had to leave their mom and dad's house was silent. Even talkative little Eric was quiet the entire car trip to their grandparents' place in East Texas. Their parents had decided to put them in the custody of their father's parents until they were done with the chaos of the divorce court. It was their aunt that was driving them to Aldridge in Angelina County. Aunt Josie tried to make them see the lighter side of the situation. At least you get to stay with your gran and granddad instead of moving from house to house all the time, she would say. Ian would scoff at this, and Alyssa would sigh, leaving her aunt stung by her inability to lift the children's spirits. When they arrived at the old cabin, their grandparents welcomed them enthusiastically and with open arms. Eric started giggling, but besides the customary hello and I'm doing good in school from Ian and Alyssa, that was it from the kids. Their Aunt Josie got into an unusually long conversation about a few new trees that she had planted in her yard, and Ian, Alyssa, and Eric went into the house and to their room, which was rather large and had 2 bunk beds. By the time they got settled in, their Aunt Josie had left, and their grandfather was getting out the pot roast they had made for dinner. The kids' grandmother was at her end of the table, ready to eat. She was confined to a wheelchair after a fall from the attic stairs. It had left her paralyzed from the waist down. In reality, she was lucky to even be alive. She was also lucky to not have lost the ability of her arms as well, but she was otherwise able to take care of herself after the kid's grandfather had made a few modifications to the house for her benefit. As everybody started eating after saying grace, their grandfather spoke. "Now, I know that this is very hard for y'all. I mean, all this moving around and hearing about this only this week. Well, I imagine that it's very stressful for everyone, but just know that I'm here for you." He finished with an assuring smile. Alyssa and Eric nodded as they slurped up their food, to which Gran told them to do otherwise. Ian just said, "Sure," in a very forced manner, trying to hide his obvious anger and disinterest at the concern of the statement. "Now, Ian, I get that you're the oldest and most mature out of your siblings, but even you need to come and talk to me if you're having issues. I want all of us to be happy these up-and-coming months because, well, you're all going to be here for quite a while. I also understand that as an average child that you're angry about all this," Grandfather told them. "I mean, it is a divorce. I mean, nothing is worse on you kids your age than what you're going through right now. I wish this wasn't happening as much as the next person, but it is, and we have to learn to deal with that the best we can." "Will we get dessert?" Eric asked. Gran smiled and looked to her husband for an answer. "Well, yes, Eric. We're going to have some leftover peach cobbler your Gran made yesterday. But first, y'all need to wash your dishes," Gran said as he tousled Eric's curly blonde and brown hair. Granddad picked the child up and put him in his kid chair. "Alyssa, could you get Eric's plate and spoon for me? I'm going out to the fridge to get the cobbler." Granddad smiled as he walked out of the hall and then through the back door. Alyssa took her and Eric's plates to the sink and started the water. She figured it would just be a quick rinse and dry, since they were getting more food after all. Ian joined her with this, and Gran and Granddad's plates and silverware. Gran went over to her spot at one end of the table and started a conversation with the kids. "So, anything special happen at school this year?" Chapter 2. The children got their bedclothes on, they brushed their teeth, and now they lay in their beds. Alyssa and Eric were in the same set of bunk beds, with Alyssa on top and Eric on the bottom, and Ian in the top bunk of his own, accompanied by their luggage on the bottom half of the bed. Granddad wheeled Gran into the room to kiss them all goodnight. "Good night, kids," Granddad said as he tucked little Eric into his bunk. "I love you, and I hope that we can all enjoy this time we're going to spend together." And he left the room. He left Gran to say prayers with them, and as soon as Eric stopped chit-chatting about a cardinal he had seen outside, she began to tell the younger children a story. Soon every child was asleep, and the lonely cabin in Aldridge fell silent in the blanket of the night. Bang! A loud crashing noise awoke the children, Ian nearly falling out of his bunk, and Eric breaking into tears. Alyssa stayed silent in terror as Ian grabbed Eric and placed him along with Alyssa in the corner behind his bunk. Ian hesitantly grabbed an old wooden bat out of one of the bags of clothing and headed out of the room, shushing his siblings the instant they asked what was going on. And the noise started again. Ian hoped that Granddad or even Gran would wake up, and he wouldn't have to use his Little League stick to try and beat up a burglar or a killer who probably had a much better weapon. Bang! The noise was coming from the back door. Of course. Someone was beating on the door, and Ian knew it. The noise stopped, and he heard a click. The door flew open, and without thinking, Ian swung the bat straight for the intruder's head. Instead of hearing a scream or a loud crack as he hit the man's head, his bat swung at the air, missing the intruder. "Whoa, easy now. It's Tucker. You remember me, Ian?" Ian opened his eyes to see Tucker, a middle-aged, gray-bearded man with a bright orange hat and brown jacket. Ian dropped his bat. Tucker had been a friend of his grandfather's since before he was born. "Oh, shit. I'm sorry, Tucker. Yeah, well, I know. Sorry for trying to kick the door down. Well, I got Meyer instinct to beat the shit out of an intruder, but I have to find your granddad. A woman discovered a den about 20 hogs, and we need to set traps." Tucker walked inside the house. Ian looked out the door at Tucker's truck, which was outfitted with a large bumper and antlers on the hood, and then he closed the door. "Well, I called your granddad about an hour ago, so you shouldn't be surprised." Just as he was finished speaking, his granddad walked into the mudroom and hunting gear, with a bag no doubt full of traps and wire, and carrying a gun. "Got everything else we need?" Granddad said. "Yep. Oh, and Ian nearly killed me after hearing me beat down the door. You might want to give him a reward for that. I told you that I got the wrong key marked." "Was the truck loaded?" "Yep." "Well, then let's go." And the men walked out to Tucker's truck and drove off into town. What a weird thing to do in the middle of the night. Ian glanced outside as the truck sped off into the distance, and he had an odd feeling that their boar hunting expedition was just an excuse for something else. They were hunting for something, but what? Ian closed the door and went back to he and his siblings' room. "What in the hell was that all about? Eric, don't say that stuff." Eric giggled at his sister's response, and Ian laughed inwardly. "Just Granddad and Tucker. They're going out hog hunting." "At this hour?" Alyssa questioned. "Apparently." Alyssa, Ian, and Eric went back to sleep. Chapter 3. Gran frantically woke the children up and brought them into the kitchen, where she and Alyssa began making muffins. After the two boys went to lay in the living room, which was directly next to the kitchen, Gran spoke to Alyssa. "So, did anything odd happen last night?" "Well, besides the whole hog hunting at 2 a.m. fiasco, no, not really." "Oh, and Eric didn't wet the bed, that's either strange or a blessing. Gran chuckled with Alyssa and continued stirring the batter. No odd feelings, nothing unreasonable or perhaps unexplained? Alyssa was getting slightly nervous. No, I don't think so. The door opened, and Granddad came into the house. Well, good morning, girls. I suppose you realize I had to stay at Tucker's the rest of the night, but we got around 15 of them hogs out of that lady's property. Granddad lifted up a pathetic-looking, young and very dead boar by its legs. Alyssa shuddered, and Granddad, obviously achieving his goal of grossing Alyssa out, put the boar down. Ian glanced over to the kitchen as his granddad laid the dead animal on the slab of wood that made up the cutting board, and his fears from the night before melted away. That morning they all had eggs, pancakes, sausage, and fruit for breakfast. Now it was 2 days later, and Ian was sweating after having completed a wood hauling assignment set by his grandfather. Alyssa was feeling nasty after cleaning the kitchen, and Eric was napping quietly. The two siblings that were awake sat on the couch in boredom, staring at the TV set. Ian's eyes found a moth, and they followed it for almost a solid 3 minutes, until he caught an idea. Hey, we should look in the attic. I wonder what kind of stuff they have from Dad's childhood up there. What? Are you deaf? I said we should snoop around the attic. Ian got up and started walking towards the room that contained the attic stairs. It's not like we have anything else to do. Ian, no. We can't look through their things. That's wrong. Alyssa ran over to Ian and pulled his arm away from the door handle. Come on, sis. Like I said, we have nothing left to do. Hell, if we get into trouble, it's not really our fault for being bored, is it? Alyssa eventually agreed to going into the attic, and Ian opened the door. The room they entered first was a simple storage room. Ian tried to flip the light switch, but the light didn't turn on. This room had not been well taken care of. The two kids just walked up the thinly carpeted stairs and opened the attic door. What they found wasn't surprising. They found things like old photographs, moth-eaten clothing, antique tools, and creepy old dolls and toys. They fiddled through the items, excited to learn about their grandparents. Ian found a pair of wooden swords and started acting like a child, while Alyssa kept to rummaging through clothing and photographs. Ian, quit acting like a dumbass and put those back, Alyssa growled. Oh no, midget girl swears for once. Ha ha ha. Ian tripped, and with a thud, knocked over a large dress mannequin, which fell over and flipped a couple of heavy books. The books dragged away an old pink and white picnic cloth as they slid, and underneath, where the books and cloth once lay, there sat a chest. Alyssa rushed over to Ian's side. Are you okay? What did you trip on? Nothing. I tripped on air, he exclaimed, obviously startled. Whoa, Ian, look. Alyssa pointed to the chest. The two children got up and moved closer to the old wooden box. Try and open it. Ian instantly broke the rusty lock, but the chest wouldn't open. Maybe the hinges are rusty or something. Ian grunted an effort to open the chest. Alyssa thought up the idea to turn the chest on its side and to try and bust it open that way. This is useless. Let's just leave. You were right. But Alyssa would not give up and turned it haphazardly on its side. No, I have to open it, Alyssa growled, pressing with increasing force against the lock loop of the chest with her foot. And snap. The chest flew open. Some of the wood had been stuck together after years of being shut, and splintered under the unexpectedly powerful pressure of Alyssa's effort to open the chest. Ian crouched back down and lifted the chest to sit it back up. Ian leaned in to open the chest and flipped it open, but all that they found inside was a lamp. Alyssa and Ian stared in disappointment at the ancient old lantern. No old weapons, no war uniforms, no old relics that might link them to anyone important in American history. Just a lamp, with the date 1903 stamped on a sliver of steel on the base of the thing. It was pretty damn old, 112 years based on the date, but not anything they were expecting from a chest that simply wouldn't open before. The lantern, strangely, was standing upright, all in spite of the fact that the children had turned the chest over, on its side, and then on its back. Ian looked at Alyssa, and then back to the lantern. It still had its oil, and despite its age, it looked as if it had never been used. "Well, you pick it up, you wanted it so badly." I don't know, I don't feel the same pull to it anymore." "Well, what do you mean by that?" Ian questioned. "When I was opening the chest, or trying to at first, I felt like I needed to have it. But I think this lamp is bad news." Alyssa looked at Ian in desperation, with a face that read, "I think we should never have come here." However, as soon as Alyssa stopped talking, Ian felt a twitch run through his face. A sudden urge made him forget any notion of danger, and he stared at his reflection in the lamp. He wanted it. Before he could even outstretch his arms to lift the lantern, he heard a loud crash from the attic door, and Alyssa and Ian's grandfather came in through the door. His eyes were half wild with fear and anger at the two children. Alyssa and Ian quickly stood up, which caused Alyssa to fall over. In her fall, the chest fell with her, and the lantern instantly rolled out of the old wooden box. "Now what in the fucking hell are you kids doing here? Y'all get out. Get out now," Granddad yelled at the stunned children. Alyssa tried to put the lamp back into the chest, but her grandfather stopped her before she could touch the ancient object. "Y'all get out of here. You should never have come up here. You leave now," the grandfather pleaded. Ian and Alyssa went back downstairs and sat on the couch, awaiting their punishment for going into the attic without their granddad's permission. But instead, as the kids' grandfather came into the room and looked at them, he leaned in to hug them. "Well, I'm awfully sorry for scaring you two. Just please don't go up there again." Chapter 4. Alyssa lay in her bedroom ashamed. She should have never went into the attic with Ian, and she knew it from the beginning that something would go horribly wrong. You can never trust older teenage boys with anything. She listened to the quiet noises escaping out of her little brother's mouth from below, and then to the heavy wind escaping from her older brother's throat, just a few feet from her own bed. Alyssa stared hopelessly upwards at the oak ceiling, the solid floor of the attic above. She wondered about what else was up there, and thought about how all those opportunities to discover more were ruined. If only they had gotten permission before entering the room upstairs. She just had to find out if everything was back in its place. She just had to. She wanted to make up for it somehow, by organizing everything and cleaning the whole attic, top to bottom. And Alyssa got up to do just that. Alyssa grabbed a lighter to use as a light source, a lock that she had used on her locker in the 6th grade, and a pair of rubber gloves. She ignored all possibilities of danger, and forgot the look on her granddad's face when he told him to get the fuck out. When she got into the attic, she began to fold the clothing, organizing the photographs by date, and then went to restore the mannequin. She lifted it up, put the garments and scarves back on, and ended with its large hat. Alyssa then instantly felt the presence of the lamp. It was still on the floor, and the chest lay open as if welcoming the emptiness inside of it. Alyssa reluctantly nudged the lamp to the side with her foot and lifted the chest back up. The old wood felt sticky on her fingertips, The paint sealer used on the old box had melted and blended together in the years it had been up in the stuffy, warm attic, explaining why it was so hard to open. All that was left was to get the lamp back into the chest and seal it with a combination lock. Alyssa fought herself to not run out of the attic in that instant and instead stay to finish her self-assigned job. After all, her grandfather would be happy and proud of her efforts to make up for her mistake of following Ian. Alyssa grabbed the elastic gloves from her right pajama pocket and slipped them on her fingers, for she did not want to directly touch the object. Something that old would be ruined if she touched it with her bare hands. Even if there was oil in the lamp, oil in the glass would not be a good thing. Alyssa picked up the lamp by its handle and examined it the best she could. She lit the lighter in her pocket, and the thing was made in 1903. Looked as unused as a child's toothbrush, and still had oil in it. This was either a fake relic or something that had been as well kept as the Queen's crown. Alyssa couldn't help but to wonder what would happen if she lit it. She figured, well, it wouldn't hurt. No, she couldn't though. She knew the odd feeling she felt pulling at her from earlier that day was bad news, and her fear had been confirmed when her grandfather didn't even punish them for going into the attic in the first place. But still, the curiosity burned in her heart and mind, and it pushed her to do it anyway. She opened up the chamber, and with a quick motion, she closed her eyes, took the lighter in her hand, and lit it. Alyssa heard a snap. She opened her brown eyes and saw the lamp, lit and glowing a perfect and playful fire. Her eyes followed the little flame dance inside of the lantern, and her worries melted away until, pop, the chamber containing the fire exploded, and the glass shattered in Alyssa's face, causing her to drop the lantern. The lantern made a loud thud as it landed on the oak floor. Alyssa pulled her lighter out of her pocket and stared in terror at the spectacle before her. The lamp shattered further when it crashed onto the floor. The oil chamber was broken, and the yellow liquid slowly seeped through the maze of broken glass. The fire was out, and the only thing that remained unbroken was the base and the wires surrounding the glass in the lamp. Then Alyssa heard a whisper. She turned toward the direction the voice came from, but saw no person, only the shadows of the boxes in the attic. It only took a few seconds for her to hear voices in every corner of the room. She cried for them to stop, but they grew louder with every plea. She saw a flicker of light. The lamp had somehow lit itself, and the voices grew louder. Alyssa now merely stared as the lamp began putting itself back together, piece by piece of glass inside of the metal frame. The whispering became more enraged until they echoed throughout the room. With every shard, the flame grew brighter, and then, when Alyssa felt that her ears would collapse from the pain of the whispering, the lamp stood upright, and as the whispering ceased to exist, the flame went out. Alyssa stood there in shock. Stunned, she picked up the lantern idly and placed it back into the chest, and as she did so, she felt a sting in her side. The stinging began to spread throughout her body, and she jumped and scratched at the feeling. She did so to get whatever was on her off. Alyssa fell over, but managed to open the attic door to escape. When she opened the door, the stings intensified. She backed out of the room, and as she jumped to claw at her right leg, she tripped on air. Chapter 5. Ian woke with a start. It was only 4:36 in the morning, but he might as well get up now. Ian quietly hopped out of his bunk and walked over to the door. He stopped abruptly as he went over to check on his little brother and sister. He first dug down to take a look at his little brother. Eric was sleeping silently, and the only noise he made was of him turning in his bed to face the wall. He stood back up to check on his little sister, and his heart nearly stopped, as did his breathing. She wasn't in her bed. Ian forgot about being silent and ran out of his bedroom, half slamming the door as he left. He ran down the dark hallway in a panicked craze. She couldn't have. How stupid was she? He was surprised at how fast he got to his destination. The room he entered was somehow darker than the rest of the house, and the only window in the room faced the opposite direction of the moon. Ian blindly fiddled around the drawers in the room to try and find a flashlight, for he was both terrified of flipping the switch for the overhead light, and he knew from yesterday that the light bulb had not been changed in years, and didn't work. He began looking on the edges of the dressers and tubs of stuff to see if anything useful had fallen off the tops of the containers. The second time, he stooped down to try and find a light source. He found a lighter. When he lit it, he froze in horror. The lighter was Alyssa's, a white Bic lighter with a small turquoise sea turtle sticker on the side of it. It's one that she had stolen from their mother a year ago. He half sprinted to the corner of the room and stopped suddenly about 3 feet away from the foot of the stairs. Then, the teenage boy broke out into tears. It was Alyssa at the foot of those stairs. Her body was battered and broken. One of her arms was bent at an angle that simply was not capable of the human body, and her left foot followed suit. Her eyes were stretched wide open and twisted with the pain that she had felt before death. They were glazed with the strange and savage terror. Her neck was twisted and hung at an odd angle. It had been snapped during her long fall from the attic. Ian threw the lighter across the room and shuffled to his sister, grabbing her in his arms and crying aloud, "Granddad! Gran! Eric! Please, she won't wake up." Chapter 6. The autopsy only took a couple of hours, as it was quite obvious at what had happened to Alyssa, despite the odd rashes that had appeared throughout her body just before she died. Still, Granddad and Gran wanted to make certain of what occurred. Ian sat in the waiting room with Eric, straining not to cry in front of the small child. And Eric, well, unfortunately, he only had a slight idea of what was going on. All he knew is that he didn't have his sister anymore. Eric felt overwhelmed at his own emotions. He felt angry, sad, scared, and confused all at the same time, which made him begin to cry. He didn't want to believe in it, but he knew in every corner of his heart that Alyssa was gone forever. He always wanted to speak when his grandparents or Ian talked about Alyssa's death, but he couldn't find the words. Eric did not know exactly what to feel, and the talkative, happy little boy fell silent. Ian, however, knew exactly how to feel. Enraged, sorrowful, and determined to harm whatever had caused Alyssa to fall down the stairs. Although Ian had not been tasked with calling his parents and telling them that Alyssa had passed on, he felt the burden worn by his grandfather to do so. It weighed in his head and sat heavily on his heart. When they left the hospital, they were told that they would send her body to a funeral home for preparation for a funeral. They had gone to the community center and then to an outdoor restaurant, and they ended their somber evening at 9:49 at night. Now, Granddad had called Tucker and told Ian alone about what he and Tucker were doing. He said that they had investigated the attic and that the lantern was missing. Gran, Eric, and Ian sat at the kitchen table, awaiting Granddad and Tucker's return. No one spoke, and the atmosphere became more intense with every second that passed. Eventually, they were all forced to call it a night and turned in to their beds. Ian listened intently as Eric let out a little sniffle and went to sleep. And every minute of it felt like an eternity, and the anger from earlier still burnt in Ian's throat, making him want to scream. All of his senses were standing on edge. Adrenaline throbbed in his head, and it was as if his eyes were sewn open as they darted carefully around the room. He knew that something supernatural had happened in the attic the night before when Alyssa fell from it. When he woke up, he had sensed something strange, and he had ignored it. Ian had to know why she went in the attic. Chapter 7. Everything seemed to click when he went upstairs. Ian looked at the spectacle before him and realized that Alyssa intended to clean the attic up as a means of an apology. Everything was put back into its place. Even Alyssa's signature of facing trinkets on windowsills towards the outside was present, and Ian couldn't help but to cry. She was trying to make up for his mistake when she came up here only yesterday. His decision to go through their grandparents' private things is what killed her. It was his idea, and he felt as though it was all his fault. A calling. Ian felt a twinge in his spine that pulled him in the direction of the chest. Fury engulfed him as he stared at the damn moldy, evil wooden box. He picked it up and threw it towards the wall behind him, but only managed to move it a couple of feet. He fell down on the object and started beating on it while crying. Ian then pushed it on its backside, slouched it over, and continued his cries to his dead sister. And when he was done, he got up and walked toward the attic door, leaving the chest. He would find the entity that did this to Alyssa and kill it. And then he heard a thud. Ian turned sharply as he heard the noise and stared at the chest. It had opened. He slowly creeped toward the chest, and Ian felt a new wave of horror crawl through his spine, and he felt a small pressure on his right shoulder as he looked inside of the wooden box. And there it was, oilless and untouched. The lantern had never left the attic.